an educational series on cybersecurity, compliance, and IT governance. Produced with the support of Freedom Technologies, Phoenix's leading managed service provider.
Our motto at Intrusion is protect everything, trust nothing. But you wanted me to talk about winning the war on cybercrime. I am Jack Blount. I'm the president and CEO of Intrusion. I've been in cybersecurity, or some form of it, long before it was called cybersecurity, for 42 years now. I started out at IBM as a system programmer. I coded one of the first security products IBM had. It was called RACF. Some of you may be old enough to remember it. Actually, it still runs on mainframes today. My name's on the patent on it. That was my first product at IBM. Skipping about 40 years, I sold my last business. I've been CEO of 7 companies, took 2 of them public. So I've got quite a long history we could talk about. But I got recruited to come help the federal government with a breach that they had during the Obama years. And I flew up to do that because I was asked to. Wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there. Spent 4 years. I quickly got converted from a consultant to a CIO of cyber warfare for the federal government. I worked there for 4 years for Obama, learned a lot, had a lot of fun, and kept the federal government safe while I was there. Obviously, we've seen breaches lately. Saying that, I think I should point out, while I was there, I took 50,000 cyber attacks per day, 24/7, 365. And I'm sure it's gotten nothing but worse since I left there. Cybercrime is exploding. It's out of control. It's far more dangerous and far more harmful than you can even imagine. So when it says, how are you going to win the war on cybercrime? Well, the first thing I tell everybody is know thy enemy. Cybercrime is no longer about college students trying to prove how smart they are or that the smartest hacker in college class. Cybercrime has already become cyber warfare. It's primarily orchestrated by nation states that are attacking businesses around the world. Most of the intellectual property attacks are coded and developed in China. If you study them, as I did for 4 years at the government and 5 years since I left there, it's real easy to see that's true. Most of ransomware actually comes out of Russian mobs, and it's all of Russian sources. Neither one of those are exclusive statements, but I would say probably 80% fall into those categories, come out of those 2 nations. This is the newest and the most potentially deadly form of warfare America has ever faced. It's escalating rapidly, and I think today we're ill prepared for it. I spend my time flying to DC, talking to congressmen, senators, even presidents, anybody that will listen to me, that we are not doing enough to protect America from cybercrime, and the government has to step up and do more. So, again, know thy enemy comes from the ancient Chinese general Sun Tzu. And I think it's very appropriate that it comes out of a Chinese person. If you really study China, and I've been there well over 24 times in my career on business, I have heard the president of China speak several times while there, as well as I was here. He has said many, many times, I will use AI to rule the world. And he truly believes he is on a mission to take control and be the sole president of the world. That's his goal, that's his ambition, that's his motivation, and it's obvious in everything they do. So leaving other politics aside, I warn everybody, don't be naive about China. They have no good intent for America. Attacks today are, again, much more sophisticated than they used to be. Even 9 years ago, when I got to the federal government and started studying these cyber attacks, one thing quickly became obvious, and that is that they're all driven by AI algorithms and supercomputers, and that they attack every IP address randomly and constantly on the entire internet every second of every day. So while there are some targeted, focused attacks like the one at SolarWinds that everybody's talked about, and I may mention it again tonight. There is a massive amount of attacks that are just driven by AI algorithms that just simply go from IP address to IP address. They use an algorithmic approach. I think on the next slide, if not, I'll talk about it, but I think I may point out. How do I know this? Yes. So as I said, as a CIO, I monitored all of our attack profiles constantly. And two things really stood out and struck me very quickly when I got to the government that did surprise me. One of them was, if you're watching a cyber attack and watching it, if you successfully defeat it, and then you see it reattack 3 to 5 minutes later with a slightly modified algorithm and a slightly modified attack footprint, and then you see it again 3 minutes, and you see it again 3 minutes, and if you sit there and watch, it will do that every 3 to 5 minutes until it gets through your network. So it is driven by AI that is learning every time it attacks you. It gets a little smarter about what to do next time. It can go back to the mothership, say I failed, modify its algorithm, and reattack in between 3 and 5 minutes. You know that's not a computer kid sitting at his grandmother's table. That's an AI algorithm with a massive supercomputer that's making billions of changes on the fly. And that's how they can penetrate anything they want to penetrate anytime they want to penetrate it. The second thing that really stood out to me in that job is how many of the connections came in and either had brand new IP addresses, which meant they're not on any block list, they're not on anybody's known attack profile, and they're most likely to be able to get through your firewall and your other defenses because they just look like a new innocent IP address. Even worse than that, and yes, this happens every day, all the time, they are able to disguise themselves as a very sophisticated, legitimate source. IBM, Google, and the State Department are three that I regularly mentioned that I personally monitored and watched that were tracked down to either be Russian or Chinese cyber attacks that literally were disguising themselves using a legitimate IP address that they had absconded with from one of these legitimate sources, because all of these big companies have thousands and thousands of unused IP addresses that they aren't policing on a real-time basis. So you can hack them, you can use them, and you can look like a good guy for 2 or 3 days before they'll figure it out and shut you down. This goes on every day of the week. Again, know thy enemy. You have to understand how sophisticated they are, how much money they're spending to attack you, and why they will be successful in the end. This chart is one of 1,000 anybody could put up, right? The attacks that go on constantly are endless. For example, IBM, to my knowledge, has been breached 3 times in the last 7 years. I can't find a bank, Wells Fargo, Countrywide, a couple of them listed here, but I've not been able to find a bank that hasn't been breached at least once, anywhere in the world. Home Depot, huge, massive retail chain, Equifax, and of course the most recent sunburst attack. These things get bigger, they get broader. Of course, in the middle of, you see, Microsoft. I mean, nobody is immune to successful attacks by cybercrime today. They're endless. There's thousands of them every single day of the week. We act like, unless we read it in the news, that it didn't happen, and there's only hundreds of them. There's literally thousands of successful cyber breaches every day. The FBI reports there is a successful cyber breach every 4 seconds of the day, 24/7. So we have to get smarter, we have to get better, we have to learn more about the enemy and how to defend ourselves. So I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, but let's use sunburst again as an example. An extremely sophisticated layered attack. Started out as a 0-day attack. That's how they got in originally to SolarWinds. Successfully breached SolarWinds by design, not by accident, and stole the source code to a SolarWinds product that they then took home, modified, and then used that to attack known 18,000 of SolarWinds customers have admitted to being breached. 16 government agencies, which were customers of SolarWinds. I believe in my estimates and calculations, and I've been doing this for many, many, many years. Again, I spent 50,000 attacks a day in the federal government for 4 years. I believe this single breach, this sunburst breach, has breached more than 100,000 businesses around the world already. And guess what? It isn't over yet. It takes years to clean up a network after a cybercrime breach. Why is that true? Again, know your enemy. If you were breached, the first thing they do when they breach your network is they implant between 100 and 1,000 cybercrime agents that they can activate or that are time driven to call home the next week, the next month, the next year. So they deposit these silent, invisible, tiny pieces of code. All they can do is call home. They're not smart enough to do anything else but call home. But because they're now inside of your network, they're calling from a trusted IP address from inside of the network. They can call anywhere they want in the world and have a successful connection and download whatever additional resources they need to thoroughly attack you. So what you fundamentally need to understand is every network in the world is infected with malware today as we sit here and talk. It's not when you get attacked. It's not if you get attacked. It's when they actually attack you. Again, if you want to understand the enemy, you need to look at 3 major myths that I think prominently exist in the industry and shouldn't exist at all. Fundamentally, almost every IT guy I've ever talked to, and I've been one for many years, will tell you that firewalls stop cybercrime. Yet a simple mathematical fact that can be checked is 100% of companies successfully breached by cybercrime had in use a firewall. Firewalls simply do not stop cybercrime attacks. What's in the second most important myth? Hardware and software from trusted vendors is free of malware. So if I buy a Dell computer or an Apple computer, I'm safe, it's clean. Well, as Joe said in his session, that's not true. When I was in the federal government 9 years ago, I started this study, which Bloomberg then copied in 2018 when they found out about it, because I couldn't report it because I was a confidential inside employee at the government. But we bought over 100 computers from 100 different Chinese manufacturers of PCs, including Dell's and Apple's, and brought them home and studied them. And every one of them had malware shipping on them when you bought them. Bloomberg did a repeat study in 2018 and found the exact same thing to be true. I don't believe you can buy a computer manufactured in China that isn't infected when you get it, which means my statement is that every network in the world is already infected with malware. So if you're trying to do any kind of perimeter security, it's not going to help you. They're already inside your enclave. They're attacking you from the inside out. The third biggest myth you hear and repeated constantly is my network is clean and free of malware. I know, I study it. I've got 6 layers of cybersecurity solutions. I've got the best firewall on the planet, and I'm clean. Well, that's not true. I can tell you from being in the government, I can tell you from 5 years of consulting, I can tell you that I've never touched a network anywhere in the world in the last 9 years that I couldn't prove to the IT professional that his network had living malware agents on it, generally hundreds, if not thousands of them, living, working, identifying passwords, codes, what access it wants all the time. The enemy is inside. That's the fundamental thing you have to know if you want to win the war on cyber warfare. You have to understand they're already inside of your network. So the challenge then becomes not how do I keep them out, how do I identify them and kill them before they hurt me. If you don't know the enemy, you have no chance of winning the war. If you understand what I've just told you, your network is infected right now. You think it's clean, or you wouldn't be watching this presentation. You'd be back at the company working on it. That's where you should be. So then how do we actually win the war? Well, I go back to basics. First thing I did when I got to the federal government is the first thing I think every business should do. You need to make sure that all of your data stored on your network is encrypted. Seldom is true. Most reports say today that only 40% of even critical data is actually encrypted. When I got to the federal government, I was put in charge of the 4th largest data center in the federal government. I had a $2.5 billion annual budget for IT, and there wasn't a database out of the 620 databases under my purview that I found to be encrypted when I got there. Within a year, there wasn't a database that wasn't encrypted. But again, number one defense that everybody can do, it's not even hard with all the technologies out today, encrypt your data. There's nothing on any computer in my company, on any notebook in my company that's not encrypted. Most reports suggest.
Jack, quick
Sorry, go ahead.
Take a quick question. Can you take a quick
Yes,
question?
sir.
So on the encryption, there's a big debate about that. BitLocker, for example, and Windows servers. But my beef with that, or the concern I have, is you can certainly encrypt at rest, but if the application is reading the data and it's infected, the encryption at rest isn't doing you any good, because the application is processing unencrypted data, even though it's encrypted.
Everything on my government networks when I left there was encrypted at rest and in motion. So yes, I believe that encryption today cannot just be at rest, it needs to be when in motion.
But not to belabor the point, but if your application is infected with malware, it's, even though it's encrypted in motion, it's getting to the application and getting decrypted memory. And that's when it can still be accessed. So if it's being processed by a software and that software is compromised.
There's no way to be 100% sure, but I can guarantee you, my estimate's 95% of the time, if you've encrypted it at rest and in motion, they're not going to be able to hurt you. They can't get access to enough of the data to actually do anything. But again, that's just one layer. That's the first layer, right? You have to use layers. But this is an easy one that everybody can do that people aren't doing. So I always start there, because you got to start with the basics. And as the last bullet says, you do need to realize that these AI agents are very smart. We have watched them and proven that they will sit and watch your network. They will learn your backup cycle. They will keep encrypting backups until you have no clean backups before they actually attack you with ransomware or something else. So don't think just because you do a backup, you're safe. You've got to study your backups. You've got to make sure you have a clean one. You've got to have an offsite one. You've really got to go to a number of layers to make encryption work, because they're very, very smart about how they attack you. Secondly, you've got to have a layered approach to cybersecurity. When I got to the federal government, sure, I encrypted everything day one because I believed that for years. But I also put in what I called a 10-layer cybersecurity architecture. When I got there, they had a 5-layer architecture that they were very proud of. But I reminded them the reason I was there is they had been breached, a breach that cost them over $500 million, that scared the government to death. And I said, you're obviously not safe, so we have to do more. So I designed and implemented a 10-layer architecture that was completely proprietary to the federal government. And certainly the 4 years I was there, they were never breached. I don't know if they've been breached in the last 5 years up until this recent one when everybody got breached. They may have or may not have. But your layers can't be static, and they have to be constantly updated. Again, they are using AI algorithms with supercomputers to study your network. They study what layer they get blocked at, how far they got through, and they keep coming back until they learn a little more. So if you aren't constantly making your layers dynamic and making changes to configurations, sooner or later you will get breached. So it's very important to have layers, to use them wisely, to use them frequently, and to constantly change them. I say today there's really one more step that you have to do to win the war on cybercrime. You have to have a single layer that has three key attributes. One, it has to have a complete database of all internet traffic, IP addresses, bad guys, good guys, everything that moves. Our company has researched for 25 years. I know there was a question asked earlier, where did we get all this internet data? For 25 years, we've been collecting internet feeds from multiple government sites around the world, from multiple country sites around the world, and from sites that we pay to buy data. We have over 160 data feeds for the past 25 years that feed into our massive, massive, massive database, which we do research on for the last 25 years, but which we just recently turned in to be the main asset of the company, because it is how our AI learned to be dramatically different than all other AI. If you know much about AI, you know the AI algorithm wasn't that hard to write, and it's not really that proprietary. Google, Amazon will tell you the only secret to AI is how massive is your database. If you have too little data, you're not going to learn anything, or you can actually learn bad information. The first thing our AI told us that we didn't know, even though we had the database and we'd studied it for 25 years, the AI came back and said there's 3.4 billion cybercrime active IP addresses on the internet real time every day. Most firewalls, most cybersecurity companies will tell you they're protecting you from somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 known bad actors. We tell you right up front, we're blocking 3.4 billion known bad active actors on the internet. That's just what we learned from the database. We also use AI real time to open and inspect every packet that moves on your network, either attempting to enter your network or attempting to exit your network. 80% of malware that we identify and find, both when I was in the government at the company I'm at now, actually happens on the exit side. It's not on the entrance side. It's the call homes to pop-up. The third element that your cybersecurity solution has to have is it has to have an AI layer that can actively kill every attempt to connect real time, coming in or going out. That's the only way you can stop cybercrime. That's the only way you can stop the activity from that infected application you just mentioned earlier. If it can't call home, if it can't exfil anything from your network, if it can't access another computer on your network, yeah, it's there and it's sitting there, but it can't do anything to you. We believe the secret in stopping cybercrime is to get back to the basics, look at the motion, look at the movement of connections, the packets, analyze them and stop them if they present any threat to you whatsoever. On average, our customers report that we kill about 1.5 million connections a month at even fairly small businesses. That's how prolific they are. Our analysis of the internet, again, 25 years, massive database, we believe that 12% of all internet traffic today is actually malware in one form or another. That's how prolific it is, and it's growing every day. That number was 3% when I left the federal government 5 years ago. I now believe it's 12%. So cybercrime is winning the war, we're not. Why don't alerts work? Why aren't they an effective defense? Because that's what all your other cybersecurity products do, is they generate alerts. Most companies report they get 10 to 15,000 alerts a month, some that many a day. Again, in the government, I saw 50,000 a day. Once they've infected your network, it's almost impossible to find and remove them because they hide themselves in hundreds to thousands of places. They only call home when they want to at some pre-programmed time, again, weekly, monthly, maybe yearly. So you have no way to go to identify them and find them. And again, they're calling out so they're safe, they can do what they want. So the only thing that works to fight cybercrime, I believe, is you have to have a real-time solution that opens and inspects every single packet of data, every connection, and kills anything that it deems to be dangerous. Now, the biggest fear customers have, and the biggest complaint I had as a CIO in the federal government, because I didn't have our Shield product today that had AI. There was no AI in the solution I had for the federal government. So we weren't able to be this sophisticated. So we had to block or kill a lot of things that look suspicious, that weren't, which meant we impacted employees' ability to do their job every day, and generally would take 2 to 3 weeks before IT would get a report, research it, validate it was good, and re-enable that connection. So they were constantly frustrated. So the third thing we did when designing this product to defeat cybercrime is we said we can't frustrate the end user. So we give the end user the real-time ability to say, this session is important to me, connect even though you think it's dangerous. We allow them to override it and connect. We then take it offline, research it in our cloud, in our supercomputer with our databases. At that point, we can decide if it's really bad or if it's really good, but it appeared to be bad because of one of 1,000 different reasons. When you're analyzing packets real time, you've got about 3 milliseconds max to make a decision. There's only so much analysis you can do. When I send that up to the mothership, I can spend an hour or 2 hours or 8 hours analyzing it. So when I come back and say, no, this is clean, it's going to go on the whitelist, I'll never block it again. Or I can come back and say, no, this is definitely dangerous. If it is, we call the IT person, we tell them we're shutting that connections down. The really exciting thing about how this works is to learn how effective, and I don't think I put it in this deck, so I'll just tell you, how effective the AI is working. If you read Gartner or Forrester, they will tell you that anywhere between 15% and 30% of the alerts you get every day are what's called false positive. They're very, very frustrating. They waste thousands of IT hours and mankind. We did not want that frustration. So we let the AI learn from this massive database to the point that when we analyze false positives at our customers, we found it's 0.001% of the time do we actually kill something that shouldn't have been killed. That's near zero. And again, the end user gets to override it and connect anyway, so nobody is ever handicapped. So we believe the only way you can win the war on cybercrime is with 2 things: artificial intelligence and real-time analysis, and I mean at the millisecond, real-time analysis of every moving connection on your network coming in or going out. With that, let me answer any questions I have, because I know I've dumped a lot of data on you, and I know you probably have several questions you'd like to ask me.
So I have a question, please. So many people now have VPNs to where they can say, even though I'm here in the US, I'm going to show I'm in Iran. So how can you deal with that? That, yeah, we're stopping these intrusions in the US, but this person who's actually in the US is showing he's in Iran. How do you deal with that?
Well, we won't allow a connection to or from Iran, period, ever.
So if someone
that's a specific country in a specific case. We're not that harsh with most countries. But again, we're using AI to analyze the connection, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, we're looking at the contents of the packet of data to make determinations about whether we think it's potentially harmful or not, and then killing it if we do think it's dangerous.
But I'm talking specifically, people can use VPNs. And
yes, we recommend all of our remote customers use VPNs.
But every person who has a VPN, you can pick wherever you want to be for your IP address to show up as. So,
right,
like I whatever VPN service I'm part of, hey, I want to say I'm here in Canada.
Right.
So
I think I
That's
understand what he's talking.
the
So
the location of the IP address. The IP address itself is only one of over 1,000 parameters that the AI uses to determine if it thinks you're dangerous or not. So yeah, you can mask yourself to be here and be in Iran. You're not going to fool us with doing that. So you know, if we were just using rules or scripts, then of course that would work. But that doesn't fool us for a second. We wouldn't be blocking, we wouldn't be killing 1.5 million sessions a month at every one of our customers if we were that easily fooled.
Okay, another
I
question.
guarantee. Sure, you bet.
So a few slides back, you had mentioned the study where you folks bought 100 machines from 100 vendors to see what was going on with them being infected.
Yep.
My question for you, if you feel that you can go into it, is did you find those infections in the operating systems that were installed, in the firmware on the processors, or maybe even over in the graphics processor card?
Pretty much all of those places, they vary by manufacturer. I mean, in one place or one vendor or another in every one of those places. It's everything from a chip on the motherboard that isn't supposed to be there, to in firmware, to on the graphics card. I mean, again, every manufacturer hides it someplace different. They're all very, very, very well hidden. It's not easy to find them. If it was, Dell and Apple would never ship those computers. They don't know they're there any more than you know they're there.
All right. Well, I am former FBI computer scientist, recently retired, spent a lot of years chasing these very characters down you've been speaking about. And perhaps offline we could have a conversation or two. Would look forward to that, if I may. Samuel
Absolutely.
Sutton. Samuel Sutton, how can I reach out to you?
Okay, I'm real easy to find. It's jack@intrusion.com.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I'd love to talk with you further.
So one thing to say, so 22 years ago, I was of the opinion that certain action, it took certain actions to be infected by a virus. So I was not an advocate of antivirus software. At the time, I was updating my computers every 2 years. And before I installed the drivers from the motherboard, I installed an anti-software or antivirus. I plugged in the disk from the manufacturer, and it alerted me the virus came in on the software from the motherboard manufacturer. This was 23 years ago. So it was like, hey, yeah. I believe it. So I'm like, I was like, okay, everyone needs to have antivirus software on their computer from the get-go. So yeah, but on the actual hardware, that's scary.
Because it can.
It is scary.
Before your operating system boots, that's what the perfect vector is for malware. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why we architected the product the way we did. We believe the only way to defeat cybercrime is from the inside out, and to literally open every single packet and inspect it and use this massive learning curve that we have from this massive database of over 1,000 different parameters that it can decide on its own if it thinks something is dangerous. Again, we've got several reports, we put them out. Our customers are finding that 0.001% is the false positives we get. Almost never does our AI make a mistake.
I had a question for you. How much horsepower do you need to do all this AI?
Well, it depends on what you mean to do all the AI. The AI that we do in analyzing the packets happens real time on our appliance, our network appliance, much like a firewall that we provide you. It's a Intel-based Dell piece of hardware with the right memory and the right processor, but I mean, there's no special magic about it. It's really about the algorithms that the AI is. that we never keep a packet in memory for more than 3 milliseconds. And we've made a decision if we're going to pass it or kill it. Now, if you're talking about how much horsepower do we have to analyze the terabytes upon terabytes upon petabytes of data that we've collected over the 25 years, we have a monster array of supercomputers that study that database 24/7, 365, and we're constantly adding more resources to it. But we leverage that cost across all of our customers around the world. So while it's expensive, it's like any other R&D. It's a cost that we can leverage across every customer. So therefore, it's an affordable cost.
I have a question to Jack.
Yes.
Given obviously the hundreds and thousands and millions of hardware that's out there that people have from years and years, of whether Surfaces or HP or IBM or Dell or whatever they've got out there, and they order these kind of things and services on it, is there, I'm just giving an example, like for instance, with what they do with Symantec and a VPN, and what a company does in terms of users that sell as a package deal, a VPN with Norton antivirus, and a package VPN together with that. I mean, is that something like that simple package that people use for one PC or a small amounts that they use at home? Is that something that terms can be also hacked in terms of what you're talking about? And the tie-in to that is, why not have something that would be similar to like a Microsoft licensing situation that could be easily put in and installed once it's there, to like what you would have to scan their systems to see that what stuff would be there. Is it can be done at an inexpensive level or something like that?
Well, I mean, you kind of asked 2 or 3 questions together, I think, but I'll try and answer it and correct me if I'm wrong. We do it through an appliance, much like a firewall that we install on your network.
Right.
It literally opens and inspects every packet, because that's the only common thread we think cybercrime has. It can't do anything if it can't connect.
Right.
So we think that's the ultimate best defense. Now, we recommend things like Norton or McAfee or these kind of standalone packages for your notebook when you're not on our network, because we can't protect you in those situations. But at the same time, they're not very good. They don't have our database.
Right.
They don't know what to block. I guarantee you, every time one of my salesmen travels and comes back to the office, we find hundreds of malware installed on his notebook, even though we run 2 different client applications on that notebook. So it's better than nothing, but no, it's not going to keep you safe.
That's why my point is,
when you reconnect to the network, we kill the bad stuff so it can't hurt you.
That's why my point is would it be possible, based on the kind of tools you have there, that you would have something, I mean, it would be a great advantage to have as a resource that would be inexpensive to deal with the individual users that are out there, because that's where a lot of the risk is at, because the individual user working from home for a business company, it's there, in terms of that concept of them, well, let's do a scan once he's got a system and find out using your tools to see if they have stuff working in the background that they don't know about, that they put in stuff. I mean, there's an idea around in terms of thinking how to deal with that.
We are working on designs and research on an affordable appliance that we could sell to every end user that they would use when they're remote. Right now, there's not a piece of hardware that we found that makes this equation affordable that can do the work that has to be done at that level. Again, we have a piece of hardware we're leveraging across all of your end users on your network.
Okay.
We don't have a piece of hardware that's cheap enough that I could sell it to one user. So if we can get it there, or if we could get it all to run in software without burying your OS, we will. We are constantly researching how to have an end user solution. Right now, all we can do is protect you when you're connected and kill anything that got on your network while you're on your computer while you were gone. So you can't reinfect the network.
So let's transition here to ELAO. I know he's got a great presentation too. Jack, I want to thank you for your presentation. Some
Very good.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, and if you get more questions, certainly take up John Comer and Jack directly.